Hello and welcome to Hooting Mandrills. Today we're going to be recapping Aetherdrift cards, today with a special focus on the colorless cards.
Start with, let's talk the cycle of colorless lands and the start your engines mechanic. So start your engines, it turns on, it starts tracking and just never stop. Once a card is in play under your control that has it as a state-based action, interestingly, if you play a threaten on your opponent's start your engines mechanic, your speed will start counting. It's not an ETB trigger. So there is a cycle of 3 colorless lands, one at each rarity, that introduce this mechanic. Oh, and then it starts ticking up when an opponent loses life during your turn. So if you damage them, or if you do something that causes them to lose life, or if they tap a pain land or pay life during your turn, engine go burr. So the 3 lands are at common, Avishkar Raceway. It starts your engines. It taps for colorless when you're at max speed, which is 4. So that's pinging on 3 separate turns, possibly including the turn you introduce start your engines, but you introduce start your engines and then on 3 separate turns, possibly including that one, you have to ping to get this online. When it's at max speed, you can, for 3 and tapping it, rummage. That one's, 4 limited mostly, probably not constructed playable. The other 2 are
Pauper games go a really long time though, and pinging is possible. The unfortunate thing is the rummage isn't that good, and colorless mana in Pauper is not exactly that necessary. But I feel like it might just be worth mentioning that maybe, because there's a lot of pinging that goes on in Pauper, so I could potentially see it, but rummage isn't that great, so maybe not. But I'll just put the idea out there.
The other 2 are a bit more exciting for non-Pauper constructed formats. They would be exciting for Pauper too, but they're not legal there. Amonkhet Raceway starts your engines, it taps for colorless. When it is max speed, it's sort of a poor man's arena of glory. You can tap it to give a target creature haste until the end of turn. Kicker for 1 mana, give thing haste is a respectable colorless land. If it were always on, you'd always play it. It's not always on, and
it takes a long time to get it on.
How hard it's going to be to turn on is a question.
I just don't think that a lot of decks in Historic, Pioneer, Standard, obviously Timeless, are really doing damage for 3 turns.
Yeah, that is sort of the thing. It's either getting in chip shots in mid-range games where being a colorless land hurts more, or you're a lower curve monocolor deck where being colorless also sort of hurts more, and you're just trying to kill your opponent by the time you get to max speed. So it's a little questionable, but it's a powerful effect. And
agreed.
So it's worth considering. And then Muruganda Raceway, when it gets to max speed, it's a pain-free Ancient Tomb. Adds 2 colorless.
This is sick. I mean, if you're playing some kind of, what is that card called? Flesh Raker?
Glaring Flesh Raker.
Glaring Flesh Raker. It's very likely that you will do damage on your turn every turn, and then it just suddenly becomes an Ancient Tomb at some point, right? So this one is the one, in my opinion, because you're happy to play some wastes anyway, right? I mean,
if
it doesn't
you're
fetch
happy
for Priest Strands, but
if you're happy to play waste, I think that Amonkhet and Muruganda Raceways are both maybe worth considering. In Standard, or I guess any of the constructed formats, you can get your speed to 2 on turn 1 by going Speed Land Gingerbrute attack. That's sort of neat. Gingerbrute is also pretty good at chipping in and getting your speed up. Maybe there's some sort of deck there that
still Standard legal as well.
Yeah, maybe there's some sort of deck there that's interested in speed lands. We also do have some good pingers that care about lands even, like Iridescent Vine Lasher. I don't know what to make of these lands yet, but I think they're pretty good, and they're a good introduction to the mechanic.
For sure, yeah. I'm not sure exactly how much we're going to see these, but I definitely think that if you're playing some kind of Glaring Flesh Raker deck, that the Raceway at least is quite powerful.
Next, we have our cycle of uncommon lands that tap for a color, enter tapped unless you control a mount or a vehicle, and for 1 and 1 of their color can tap and sack them to make a 1/1 pilot that cruise as though its power were 2 greater. I mean, these are not that bad, right? You need to be in a deck that actually has vehicles in play. Maybe you're trying to do the Death Shadow thing with the last ride, and it's just sitting around on the battlefield for a lot of the time. You can play like foul roads over a swamp, and eventually you just make a pilot and kill your opponent. Maybe you're a dedicated mounts deck that just puts enough of them into play that your lands come in untapped. But when they come in untapped, they are better than a basic land by enough that they'll see some play. I don't think they're the most exciting thing. They are uncommon.
So no popper fun with these. But yeah, I think that the biggest issue with these is like sort of similar to those Bloomburrow lands, where I guess it's a sort of a different issue, but the downside of the land is pretty great. So if you're playing the vehicles deck in standard, we'll get to it, but there's a 1-drop white vehicle. So like having to play Country Roads, Take Us Home, tapped, then you can't play that vehicle is a pretty bad place to be. I don't know. I don't think you want a lot of these, less than you would put the Bloomburrow lands into your deck. Maybe 2 of at max. It's like pushing it.
I agree that like the Bloomburrow lands, they're pretty fringe. I think they will see some small amount of play.
Yeah, the Commander, I'm sure that people will eat this up. We don't care though. So let's move on to our next cards, which are Verges. So we complete half of the total possible Verges. These Verges all look weird because the color that they tap for is not the first one on the card because of the way that outlining for cards work.
Yeah, because they chose to go counterclockwise around the color wheel for these Verges. But yeah, I mean, you know what Verges do?
Well, every red-white land is red then white. Yeah,
right.
It's just the way they do it. So yeah, if you're drafting, take a look at them and make sure. I mean, you'll probably just slam this in any deck if you're drafting. But yeah, so we get white-black with black, red-blue with red, red-white with white, green-black with green, and blue-green with blue.
Yeah. So you know how these work. In standard, they're good. In older formats, especially fetch formats, they are sort of competitive with fast lands, roughly speaking. Depending on the mana requirements of your deck.
I think that Sunbillow Verge is the color you want most of the time. So that'll be potentially seen in the energy decks because you usually want to start with a white 1-drop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not to spend long amounts of time talking about my particular Necroscam deck, but I think it's illustrative. Bleachbone Verge is maybe better. Putting in a Concealed Courtyard tapped often sucks. Tapping for black means that it does cast Dark Ritual on turn 1, although not casting Guide or Pride or Swords is a little sketch, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, that's
they're all
deck
worth
construction
experimenting
stuff.
with. They're all of a power level that you can play them in even formats with really good lands. All right, next we have the Aetherspark. This is the first of like 5 cards in this set that are like Enduring Curiosity, but worse. For 4 mana of any color, it is a legendary artifact planeswalker equipment. We have not had that type line before. Even Karn, for all the other ways he's busted, is not an artifact planeswalker. It's also an equipment. Maybe in old silly formats, or maybe in old formats this is searchable off Stoneforge Mystic. I don't know. I'm not sure it's good enough, but let's talk about what it does before we make that determination. As long as the Aetherspark is attached to a creature, it can't be attacked, and has, whenever equipped creature deals combat damage during your turn, put that many loyalty counters on the Aetherspark. So that's important to note, that's combat damage, not to a player. So if you attach this to something and it has 2 power, trades off in combat, this thing still gets the 2 loyalty counters. So for +1, it attaches to itself to a target creature you control, and then put a 1/1 counter on that creature. Starts with 4 loyalty. For -5, it draws 2 cards, okay. And then -10, it adds 10 mana of any one color. Yeah, I mean, like I said, in older formats, I don't know why I called them silly. I tend to prefer them.
Exclusively play them.
Like, you can find this off Stoneforge Mystic. Maybe it's worth it as a one of, if you're trying to do hammer time stuff or something. It's possible that this can get a bunch of loyalty and do some things for you. In Standard, it does really just seem worse than Enduring Curiosity most of the time. Maybe you can play it if you're like mono green and get a card advantage disadvantage engine that helps you in grindy decks there. Maybe you try to get cute with like the Ichormoon Gauntlet, another bad card that you shouldn't play, but that does have text on it that lets you spend a bunch of loyalty to do powerful things.
Yeah, it's also okay Delirium card, just being an artifact planeswalker, are two harder types to get into the bin, but it's a little fringe. I don't know. I mean, I'm certain that people will try it, but at 4 mana, you know, it's not the One Ring. Like, it's not that good. So I don't know. 4 mana is always tough in any format, really. But we'll see. I'm sure that people will be cooking with this one and trying to do something silly, but it just doesn't seem to have everything you would want.
Next up, we have Guidelight Matrix. 2 mana artifact. It's a common. When it enters, draw a card. So starting from a template that is sort of a pauper pedigree, and then it has 2 activated abilities, both for 2 and tapping itself. Target mount you control becomes saddled until the end of turn as a sorcery, and then target vehicle you control becomes an artifact creature until end of turn, not as a sorcery. So if you have mounts and vehicles that you really care about being able to crew, and maybe you're sort of creature light, maybe you're some sort of Death Shadow deck trying to do Last Ride Caustic Bronco things, maybe. It does cantrip. It's a very fringe player if it's anything, but you know, I'm trying to get everything onto these slides that I think is fringe playable and then some.
Yeah, the problem with this card is a lot of vehicle and saddle abilities are that they care about the thing that saddled them. So not all the time, but like obviously we've got Caustic Bronco, and then there's also that Unicorn that sees some play in Standard that don't care about the mounted thing, the thing that mounts,
and are pretty hard to saddle. They have,
yeah,
like,
with
saddle
3
3 and
saddles. So
saddle
this
4.
is where this card is most valuable, I think. But yeah, I just think that
you also
oftentimes
have to
it's just not good enough.
Yeah,
but
you also have to not have access to any of the better auto saddle, auto crew cards in this set.
It still costs
because of
mana every turn.
Because of your color requirements or because of the kind of deck you are. But there may be some times when you'll reach for this.
Yeah, it's a little fringe, but potentially possibly good. Next up, we have Lifecraft Engine for 3. It's a vehicle 4/4. As this vehicle enters, choose a creature type. Vehicles, creatures you control are the chosen creature type in addition to their other types. Each creature you control with the chosen type other than this vehicle gets +1/+1. Okay, so that's kind of cute, right? Where we get this quasi lord, but it's a chosen lord, so you can put it in any kindred deck and have it be a lord, and it also turns your vehicles into that type as well. I think it's a little difficult in many kindred decks because you can't hit it on Collected Company, you can't hit it off of Realm Walker, so if you can get it down, it's good, but you need to have a ton of synergy with it. On our page, we've got Pirates, which already seem to be an obvious choice because there's so much artifact synergy with Pirates, and so potentially there. Obviously, it's also board wipe resistant, which is something that is useful. Or then the other thing is Dwarves with Magda. I don't know if you have any silliness you want to explain with the Magda stuff, but
not really. Like, I played a lot of Magda when she was in Standard. I like the card a lot. This thing grows, the Lord effect grows her enough that she can crew this, you know, just herself. Crewing things with Magda is better than attacking with her because she dies to fucking everything. You know, she was best friends with Asika's Chariot when Call Time was in Standard. I don't know if this is necessarily going to make Dwarves in Pioneer or whatever a thing. Might be just a little too awkward and clunky, but maybe if you have significant color requirements, significant color restrictions, you're really trying to be mono red or limited colors, you want vehicles for Magda. I guess Dwarves also have some other artifact synergies, like Loin in Historic cares about historic spells. It's not impossible, but when I'm talking about, like, oh, you're a mono-red deck with dwarves and vehicle synergies, you're just describing a Magda Commander deck at a certain point. And yeah, I think these, like, 3-mana clunky Lord effects are not that great usually, but this one's sort of interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty fringe once again. I think that we're really only talking about pirates and dwarves.
It's good that colorless cards are often fringe. That's good, folks. Remember what the One Ring did to you.
We prefer that these cards are fringe. I do always wish when they print Kindred type things that they would be good, because there's very few places. I mean, I play mice to a certain degree, Kindred already, but you know, I always like to play weird Kindred decks, and this isn't really helping. Maybe in Pirate. I tried Pirates last time they printed a pirate card. Maybe I'll try again, but not that likely. All right, now we have Marketback Walker. For XX00, this creature enters with X11 counters on it. 4, put a 1/1 counter on this creature. When this creature dies, draw a card for each 1/1 counter on it. So, you know, we have Hangerback Walker and why am I blanking? The other XX one that's a lot better. Walking Ballista.
Walking Ballista not on Arena.
Not on
and
Arena
banned in
still.
Pioneer, which is probably why it's not on Arena.
But yeah, this is worse than both of those.
Think so.
Maybe better than Hangerback Walker, I guess. Hangerback Walker leaves you with new friends when it dies. This leaves you with cards, but
I think this card is plausible. Scales players in Modern seem relatively excited about it. There are scalesy effects in Standard and Pioneer. You know, there's cards like My Friend Voldaren Thrillseeker that can pants up a card like this, shoot something, draw 4 cards, likely to be pretty decent. Other scalesy cards like the Ozlith. Yeah, I don't play enough of like really conventional scalesy decks to be a super expert on that, but I think this card is pretty good. I think drawing lots of cards is likely to
drawing
be
cards
powerful.
is definitely good, yeah. I worry that it's harder to get this one going, but you know, it's good with Bristly Bill and stuff in Standard, so maybe there's some counters deck. I've kind of been thinking that there might be some counters deck just waiting in the wings that nobody's really trying. It's kind of hard to play scales against aggro, because you just like have to have enough removal, but then you also have to have enough card draw to deal with the mid-range decks. So maybe this kind of bridges the gap. Yeah, maybe this is helpful again for the mid-range matchups with your scales deck in Standard. It's worth trying. I mean, it's a cool card. I'm just not sure whether or not it's going to be good or not, but usually these cards are. So
next up is Monument to Endurance. 3-mana artifact. Whenever you discard a card, choose one that has been chosen this turn. Draw a card, create a treasure token. Each opponent loses 3 life. So this is sort of like your cycling deck payoff, your analog to Zenith Flare from Menace of Ikoria Limited, and seen some play as a Standard and Pioneer card. There are other good cycling cards in this set. Marauding Mako, who we'll talk about later, very good 1-drop. A lot of like 1-mana cycling cards in this set that might enable this. A lot of pretty good discard effects that are already in Standard, like Kiora, or if you have some sort of artifact synergy as well, maybe something like Brass's Tunnel Grinder, where if you're triggering this a lot, getting all 3, I mean, technically you could get all 3 on your turn and all 3 on your opponent's turn. This could be pretty good. It is a 3-mana artifact that doesn't do anything else, so
yeah,
a little bit of a we'll see, but it does things.
There's still the Simulacrum Synthesizer card, which this triggers.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's powerful, but
as does Brass's Tunnel Grinder.
As does yeah, so those are all cards that are good together, I guess. But yeah, I think that there's definitely some way. I think that there's going to be a lot of discard type decks that are a lot more powerful in every format because of Mako. So this card could be a friend.
Next, we have Pit Automaton. 2 mana, 0/4 artifact creature construct with Defender. Taps to add 2 colorless, but spend this mana only to activate abilities, or you can pay 2 and tap it to double up your next exhaust ability. Exhaust abilities are new to this set, though they say that they're going to continue using it. It's just a way to refer to an activated ability you can activate only once. So this is sort of like an Omen Hawker. It isn't a 1-drop, which is worse, but it dies to less, which is better. If you really care about activated ability mana, maybe this fits in alongside Hawker and Jewel. Again, it's a colorless card, it's fairly fringe, it might be a player.
0/4 is pretty good though.
Yeah, it blocks a lot.
Still dies to cut down, but oh well. Next up, we have Racer's Scoreboard. Scoreboard, which is a Start Your Engines card for colorless artifact. When this artifact enters, draw 2 cards, then discard a card. So we're already seeing our discard payoffs somewhere. And at max speed, spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So pretty powerful at max speed. Like we said before, max speed is not the easiest to accomplish always, but
yeah, I think mostly this card is pretty bad. 4 mana is not where you want to be for a Tormenting Voice. If you're in a deck that gets to max speed, or maybe if you're like a really blinky, like scroll shifty deck, but probably not. Maybe if you're a really artifacty deck that cares about speed and is decent at getting up to it. Why did I put Thran Spider on this slide? I guess because it's an artifact. And the Thran Spider seems like it may just have been a message from Drunk Sam that I'm not capable of deciphering. I think usually if you put this card in your deck, the person saying Scoreboard will be your opponent.
yeah, I don't even know that you want to draft this.
And in draft, I think
like
this card's terrible.
Impossible for anything. This card may not be playable in any format.
In draft, it's unplayable. In standard, it's, if anything, very fringe, but it does some things that are sort of interesting. Okay, here's a card that does a lot of things that are perhaps a little too interesting. Radiant Lotus, 6 mana. It taps and sacrifices 1 or more artifacts. Choose a color, and target player adds 3 mana of the chosen color for each artifact sacrificed this way. Target player is usually you, but it's phrased this way so that it's not a mana ability. So this is in some ways interactable and counterable, and yeah. That said, this card sure is pretty similar to Krark Clan Ironworks, a card that is very powerful and has a history of being very annoying. It's almost banned for being annoying more than it's banned for being powerful. This is not as obnoxious as KCI because you activate it in 1 shot. It's still gonna do like big, dumb, non-deterministic things in many formats.
At 6 mana, though, you're already in the grind game. If you're getting to 6 mana, they've already shut down whatever plan you have.
Yeah, this feels like it's a combo card. If anything, it's a combo card.
Yeah,
that
maybe infinite combo.
Like produces some sort of infinite
storm or something.
Or some sort of, maybe it's there in some sort of affinity deck. This is one where Thran Spider makes a little more sense to me. It's an artifact that makes an artifact and helps you ramp up to get to 6 mana to then maybe do other stupider things once you get there. Gold Pan, also an artifact that makes an artifact. Older formats, you have more efficient artifacts that make artifacts, like Blood Fountain, as well as some more artifact lands. In older formats, you can Karn for this sometimes. I want to bring it up because I've heard people mention it. This card in conjunction with big scorecard that everyone periodically remembers exists, Esoteric Duplicator, which says whenever you sacrifice it or another artifact, you may pay 2. If you do, at the beginning of your next end step, you create a token that's a copy of that artifact. People have talked about this card with that. It mostly doesn't work because you don't have the mana from Radiant Lotus until after you have to pay for Esoteric Duplicator, because the Radiant Lotus ability goes on the stack. Or wait, maybe you can stack them actually, because you pay the cost for Radiant Lotus and then all the Esoteric Duplicator triggers. No, all the Esoteric Duplicator triggers go on the stack in
before you get the mana.
Radiant Lotus. I am pretty sure. I'm not a judge. If if you are and you say this does work, sound off in the comments. But I think that you're only doing the crazy esoteric duplicator thing
if you already have
more mana on top of the mana you're trying to produce with Radiant Lotus to start doing this thing. So that may not be the combo that you are looking for with this, but there is probably some combo somewhere. It's probably going to be really annoying. You're probably going to hate this card.
Yeah, I already kind of hate it, but I don't even think it's going to affect me. I don't know. I don't really see this. Maybe there's a standard combo, but
it reminded me that Karn the Great Creator exists, and that alone filled me with incandescent rage.
Yeah.
So
we'll see. Yeah, you guys can go ahead and be annoying with that card. All right. Now we have Walking Sarcophagus for 2. It's an artifact creature zombie cat. That's cool. 2/1. Start your engines. Max speed. This creature gets +1/+2. So if you're at full speed, you get a 3/3. It's a 2/1 for 2. Starts your engines.
Yeah, I mean, this card it's bad. It's bad, but if you're specifically playing a lot of speed lands and are sort of colorlessy or artifacty, are interested in getting to max speed, it's sometimes a watch wolf. It has some relevant types. It's quite a bad card, probably shouldn't be in most of your draft decks, but it's on the theme of fringe and then some. It's not even that good when you have max speed. Yeah,
it's a 3/3 after 4 turns.
If you just need bodies, and if you have a really bad need for speed and are not good at producing colored mana, it may be in part because of your need for speed. Maybe this makes the cut, but it's quite bad.
And that's it. That's all of our colorless cards for Aetherdrift. Stay tuned for the rest of our recaps. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe.